On today's Locked On Jayhawks, another Jayhawk transferring out of the program, number 5 with MJ Rice. Let's discuss what it means for him, for KU, and moving forward.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Jayhawks. I'm your host, Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk and the Best of RCST podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're discussing the newest player to transfer from KU. That would be one MJ Rice. So Rice becomes the 5th transfer to leave the program for KU to this point, and now kind of all eyes turn on what's going to be the case with Kyle Cuff. I think a good amount of, people who are in the know on this stuff seem to be leaning more toward him transferring, but I guess you never really totally know. Now, as far as Rice, it wasn't the season that you would have hoped for. Came in 6'5", chiseled freshman wing from Durham, North Carolina, played a year of prep ball in California, and came in, some sites had him listed as like a 5-star, other sites as a 4-star. The 24/7 composite had him listed as a 4-star, but a high-end 4-star, the number 32 overall recruit in the country, and it just didn't really work out for him. Certainly there were some injury stuff that really hurt the season for him, and maybe prevented the wheels from really getting going early on in the season. I think I heard some stories maybe early in the season talking about maybe a lack of, understanding of end of game situation or practice habits. I sort of think, but maybe some of that was just to do with, the back injury, and that could be a real reason why. And then at the end of the day, he only ended up playing in 23 games, didn't have a single start, played 7.5 minutes in the games that he did play, 2.2 points per game, 1 rebound per game, shot 41% from the field. He shot 20%, 3 of 15 from downtown. In terms of the last time we saw him, it was the Texas game in the Big 12 tournament, which he actually played 15 minutes, oddly enough, in the Big 12 championship game against Texas, because KU was obviously without Kevin McCullough and everything, but it was sporadic play for him. And early in the season, there were some of those struggles. Then I think it was the second game of the year against North Dakota State where he plays 18 minutes. He has 10 points, 4 rebounds, looked really good in transition, but couldn't really capitalize on that with more minutes. We didn't really see him. He had the, I think it was the kidney stones during the battle for Atlantis, which held him to, I think he played 3 minutes against Wisconsin. He played 13 against Tennessee. But then the next game, it was probably the best game we saw him play as a Jayhawk. 21 minutes played against Texas Southern. He went 6 of 9 from the floor, 2 of 4 from 3, 5 of 6 at the foul line. He had 19 points to go with 3 rebounds. And it was Texas Southern, sure, but it was like, okay, this guy's starting to get a little bit going there. Then he gets Seton Hall, 13 minutes, 5 points off the bench. It was like, maybe he's establishing something. But then after the break, it just never came around for him. And there were a few moments like the Texas game at home, he played well, but he could never really capitalize on that momentum, whether it was the injury or practice habits or inconsistencies, whatever it was, just could never kind of keep the arrow going forward. And it's unfortunate for him because obviously this is a guy that came in with expectations of being a one and done. He wanted to come in and have a Grady Dick-like season. He wanted to come in and, at the very least, if he's coming off the bench, make a big impact, be playing 20, 25 minutes a game, and in some games close and really provide a scoring punch off the bench. And it just never materialized for him. So you understand why he's going to go somewhere else. I think from the KU perspective, it's obviously very unfortunate. When you looked at this team's roster coming into the year, it was you were certainly relying on both those freshman wings with Grady Dick and MJ Rice because you knew they were going to have to play an important role on this team. Grady obviously did. With MJ, you didn't end up getting it. And the bench was a slog. It was a struggle for KU all season long. If you would have had a guy that you thought was going to be able to come in and contribute right away at a high level, giving you real contributions off the bench, and beyond that, a guy that can kind of get his own bucket a little bit. Now, we saw him struggle shooting the ball, and maybe he wasn't quite ready to be that guy, obviously, shown by the lack of playing time and everything. But the potential of MJ Rice was to be the guy that, could come off the bench and create his own shot or drive to the rim or be another shot creator for you, who's another athlete for you. I mean, it's not like you had crazy athleticism on this last year's team and a bunch of guys that were throwing down jams. Like you had KJ and Ernest throwing down lobs. But as far as the wings go, he might have been your best like power athlete from that standpoint. But it just, again, never materialized, and you never got to really see that come together. And there were a lot of I think comps made with MJ Rice to Wayne Selden, both kind of power guards. Wayne Selden was still like a top 10-ish recruit in the country who was known for being a good shooter. And he struggled a little bit in his early going, but he still was playing a lot for those teams. With MJ, you didn't really have that go in. So it sucks for KU it didn't work, because that could have been the difference if MJ Rice hits, of KU maybe still playing right now because they have another world-class athlete who's scoring for them and giving them those contributions off the bench that they didn't really have this season. As far as how KU views this, I think that you could convince me both parties are content with the result here, in that for KU, well, this didn't really work out. You don't want somebody, if they're disgruntled and unhappy, sticking around the program. And clearly you have some other targets you're going after in the transfer portal. You have some good freshmen coming in that sometimes that can be more helpful for giving out minutes, or maybe you can even find a better player in the transfer portal than what MJ Rice would have been as a sophomore at KU. So from that standpoint, it could. And for MJ Rice, he gets a new start somewhere. He can maybe find somewhere that ends up being a better fit for him. I would imagine he, still is going to get like a Power 5 somewhere, but maybe less of a blue blood and more of a Power 5 that he can come in and play through his mistakes, as opposed to when he's at KU, you make one mistake, you make two mistakes, you're going to the bench right away. So that'll be good for him, I would imagine. And I think for KU, it's not that you wanted him to leave. Like I said, you could, obviously, like maybe MJ Rice's potential is better than the player you would get with his scholarship in the transfer portal. But you can argue that the player you get in the transfer portal is better for this specific season for your team. But still, you probably didn't want him to go if you're KU. And I'm sure there was some conversations with the staff or with Bill Self to try to maybe keep him because of the potential. I talked about this last week. There's not a lot of guys in the transfer portal who are potential pros. Like you got one last year with Kevin McCullough, right? And that's not necessarily a first round pick, but I don't know, probably early second round pick with Kevin. Usually if guys are going to be pros, or if they're going to be first round draft picks, they go to the NBA draft. Usually if guys are sticking around the transfer portal, there's a reason, because they're not quite draft ready yet, or they are not seen as being, one of those top 40 picks in the NBA draft. They have holes in their game. So you're not going to get a perfect player who does this, and that, and is an amazing athlete, because that player is either just staying at his current school where he's the star, or he's probably going to the NBA draft. And the idea with MJ Rice, because of the potential, I mean, you're talking about from his athleticism, the body type, the potential of what he could be, is a potential maybe first round pick. And you're not going to find many of those guys in the transfer portal. So from that standpoint, it made sense if KU were to view this as, no, we don't really want you to leave. But if MJ viewed it as, yeah, but I don't think this was the best opportunity for me, or maybe I'm looking for something else, and he goes. But again, you could convince yourself that KU was like, well, we'd rather get the player that maybe helps us win now a little bit more. Because if you're just viewing this from a playing time standpoint, this isn't the situation of, maybe if you're like Zach Clements, you transfer out and you go, well, they have Ernest Uday and Zuby Ejiofor in front of me right now. And KJ Adams, if he's playing any minutes at the 5, even though I think KJ will be more of a 4 this year, he could play, 5-10 minutes still at the 5. It's going to be hard for me to get on the court. With MJ, you're viewing it as like, oh, well, all these guys could depart. I could have a real look at playing time, but you got to compete out with some other guys that they're going to be bringing in with the transfer portal or with freshmen. And because it just didn't totally work out, I don't think his dad or parents were overly happy with the situation. I think MJ might have been a little bit happier than the parents there, but that's what kind of just ends up happening now. All right, we're going to talk about what it means for the wing position and what's next for KU in just a second here. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought by FanDuel Sportsbook. The tournament is heating up. There's no better place to bet on the action than at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the nets, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your chance at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. What this means for his position specifically. MJ, kind of a wing type, could play the 2 and 3 mostly. I think you could probably get away with him playing as a small ball 4, even though he's 6'5", because of how athletic he was and kind of strong and built and everything. So realistically, it's, either way, it's just wing minutes, because I think that's the way Bill Self is going to want to continue to play, with at least 2 big wings out there, a lot of times 3 big wings. But I do think this year you'll see a lot of DeJuan playing next to Elmarco Jackson. Also, though, Elmarco Jackson at like 6'3", with the type of athlete he is and the length he has, he basically is like, outside of just the 6'3" part, he basically is like a wing. But I mean, he's going to jump higher than a lot of those other wings and the length and everything. So what it means for the wing position? Well, pretty much means that your entire wing group is gone. I guess going back to yesterday's episode, is there a small chance that Grady Dick comes back? Maybe. But realistically, Jalen Wilson gone, Kevin McCullough gone, Grady Dick gone, all going to the NBA. MJ Rice now transfers away. That means you have 0 guys back from last year's team who played on the wing for you. You do have a lot of bodies there, at least potentially, based on some rumors about, okay, he was going to go after this guy in the transfer portal and stuff, and that'll certainly be the biggest position they target. As far as the guys that you have on your roster right now that can play on the wing, if KJ does indeed move to being more of a kind of 4-man, okay, you kind of count that as being kind of a wing center hybrid, right? What if he plays, 10, 15 minutes as a 4, and then he gives you 5-10 minutes as a 5-man, right? So that covers some of your wing minutes there, but it still leaves a lot to be open. I mentioned Elmarco Jackson. He'll play a lot next to DeJuan Harris at that 2 spot, which will be counted as another guard, but sort of as another wing if you're viewing the wing minutes as the 2 through 4 positions. But then the guys who are kind of true wings, Chris Johnson comes in, and he's kind of a combo guard as well. Like, he could even be your like 3rd or 4th string point guard potentially, but he'll probably be playing a lot on the wings. You have him coming in. Jamari McDowell, known as a good athlete. He's kind of a wing for you at the 3 position. And then Marcus Adams. Adams is listed as a small forward. I'd imagine for KU, he'll profile as a 4-man, but you could probably play him at the 3 or the 4. So pretty much you have 3 freshmen coming in who are going to play along that wing and fill up the minutes, but you also don't know who's going to, just back to MJ Rice. He was number 32 recruit in the country, which is higher than all of these Kansas kids coming in, with the exception of, I think, Elmarco Jackson. I forget where Marcus Adams moved into the reclass. I think number 36, and MJ Rice was 32. So I'm high on Marcus Adams. I like his potential. I think Chris Johnson can be really good. Like, I think all these guys can contribute for KU at some point or another, but sometimes with freshmen, it takes a little longer. There's the point right there with MJ Rice. So it's nice to say, well, I think Marcus Adams can do this, but this is why I try to be a little trepidatious with my freshman projections, because for some guys, it takes longer. And then almost you're better off just being pleasantly surprised if they do hit above that. Now, for the guys that are McDonald's All-Americans, I think you do, rightfully so, especially if they're like a top 20, top 25 kid, like Elmarco Jackson, like Grady Dick was. I think that you're more right to expect higher contributions. But even then, we've seen kids come in, right? Wayne Selden played a lot, but he certainly struggled. Quentin Grimes played a lot, but he certainly struggled. Bryce Thompson, he wasn't a starter. He was coming off the bench of the rotation and everything. So you can't really be totally sure with some of these guys how it's all going to work. And that means that there is a lot of uncertainty in the wing position, which brings us to what is next. Well, KU is going to hammer the wing position in the transfer portal. We'll get to that here in a second with Locked On Jayhawks. So what is next for KU? Well, as I mentioned, they're going to hammer the wing position in the transfer portal. I know there's been some talk about them being interested in Graham Ike and the big man from Temple, and they had the in-home visit with Norm Roberts. If they have, because right now you have 3 scholarships open, basically. If Grady Dick were to hypothetically come back, then you'd be down to 2 scholarships open, but we don't expect that. Right now you have 3. The next big thing, honestly, is just the Kyle Cuff decision. Is that going to give you 1 more scholarship? or is he going to stick around? I think that the way I view it, you basically have 4 scholarships here. One of them will either go to Kyle Cuff or someone who can be kind of a combo guard for you. Doesn't necessarily mean you expect them to start, but somebody that can at least compete with Elmarco Jackson and be a veteran presence to him, and at the very least be someone who's comfortable coming off the bench to be the backup for both of those guys, right? So that could be your first scholarship, and maybe that is Kyle Cuff. I think of the other 3 scholarships, 2 of them go to wings, and then the 4th one is kind of a pick and choose between either another wing or a big man that you find good enough. I don't think KU is going to bring in a big man just to bring in a big man. I think if they're going to bring in a big man, it's going to be somebody who fits a specific role, which is being able to score with their back to the basket. Now, in the case of the Temple kid, maybe he's someone who comes in the ilk of, like, we've seen this before, like a Hunter Mickelson, who comes in and can compete for the center role, but he's more of like a bench big that fits a specific niche for you. With Graham Ike, if he comes in, maybe he can beat out Ernest Uday and he is your back to the basket score, right? So it kind of depends which way you want to go, but that's kind of how I view them using these scholarships at this point. And that means you're bringing on at least 2 wings as part of this process here. And when you look at the starting lineup, DeJuan Harris at the 1, I expect KJ to move to the 4, probably Ernest Uday at the 5, unless you bring on, one of those centers who usurps him. Then you're looking at those 2 other starting spots. Maybe one's Elmarco Jackson, and maybe the other is a transfer. Maybe both are transfers, right? Does KJ move to the 4 or 5? Whatever it is, either way, you're going to be looking for a lot of additions. And that's kind of where we're at now. You're waiting the Kyle Cuff decision. Then the next piece of the puzzle is the different visits, the Zoom meetings, the in-homes, the brings to Lawrence and to Kansas. There is a dead period coming up here for about a week. And then once that ends, I think it'll really start to pick up with those different visits. Keep in mind, I think Kevin McCullough chose KU in like the middle of May last season. Remy Martin, I think, also was the middle of May. And those were both guys who were going through the NBA draft process before they decided to come back. But there's going to be more names that continue to pop up in the transfer portal once the Final Four ends, as the NBA draft process goes on, that it's going to continue to add more good players and more options for KU. And so, yeah, it wouldn't hurt to grab a couple guys in the early period to make you feel like you have a couple things set in stone for the rest of the offseason. But also, it doesn't hurt either to have a scholarship or 2 open through kind of the end of that NBA draft process for a couple of those guys like Kevin McCullough and Remy Martin that could just very well come back and end up being like toward or at the top of the transfer class coming in. And then once that happens, you'll start to get additions. So I'd imagine we're going to see, maybe we'll see a couple additions, 1 or 2 additions in the next couple of weeks. But I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a couple more additions until maybe like the middle of May, which I know that sounds like a long way away, but hey, I'm all for it. I know for a lot of people, transfer portal is not very fun and all these things, but for me, just trying to make content and talk about different things, there's so much content going on, which actually I'm going to be doing I don't know if I'll get to this later this Friday or maybe next week sometime. We'll do a deep dive into all kind of the targets that maybe there's been rumors this player's heard from Kansas, or who they're actually in on, who I would be going after, who I think makes sense for Kansas. So we'll do a deep dive on that. I think tomorrow's episode, we're going to do a what we can learn from this Final Four about KU and roster construction headed into this offseason. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back for tomorrow's show on your Friday, because this will come out on Thursday. I guess, who knows? Maybe we'll have heard from Kyle Cuff before then. Maybe that news will even come out, whether he's staying or going, before this episode drops. And if that is the case, then the next episode would probably be dealing with that. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. You can hear me on Rock Chalk Sports Talk Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence. And you can also check out Locked On Jayhawks. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. Find us on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up if you could. Have a good rest of your day. Time with